The world of trading card games is a ruthless one. Many hundreds have met their fate and died. However, the remains they leave behind never truly vanish from this world. Welcome to Cards from the Abyss!
Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and welcome back to Cards from the Abyss. Today we're taking a look at the game Crusaders of Lornia. I believe I mentioned it in one of my videos before, however, we're actually going to be taking a look at the game proper today. This is a game you've probably never heard of, and that's because it's an independent game, one that was crowdfunded into existence. Now, my stance on independent games is I try to be a bit nicer to them because they weren't developed by a major company. However, this may be an independent game, however, it is a published independent game. They had, like starter decks and comic books and t-shirts. Yeah, that's what this is here. This is actually a t-shirt that I'm filming it on. You can kind of see, like, there's the tag and stuff. But yeah, it's a published game, so I will still be a bit. I can still be a bit more open to it. Like I don't know if I've said this out loud, but I don't plan on reviewing like homemade TCGs. I don't plan on just like going out and like grabbing whatever I see off a Game Crafter to review because, my standards are set by the major brands, and I don't want to be a bully. So that's why I'm not going to be reviewing like most independent games. If I'm going to do it like unprompted, it'll have to have at least been published. And in this case, we have the company Eternal Relic Games, which brings us Crusaders of Lornia. And like I said, the store I got this from, I got all this stuff online. They must have clearly been in on the bottom level because they had t-shirts. But it is a science fiction card game about there's at least in the story that we got so far, as illustrated by the comic book that they put out, is that there is a zombie plague spreading on a planet, and they have grown resentful that a cure has not been discovered yet, and so they launch an attack on the world. So it's nice to see a game that's not like based on high fantasy, although one of its main inspirations only has so much based on high fantasy, because this game, it's like I said, I'm going to try to be nicer to independent games, but the thing is, this game has a couple of mechanics that just do not work well together at all. I don't know if I've said this, but it doesn't matter if your mechanics are sound, if they're not fun, if they don't generate like an interesting and dynamic gameplay experience, then they're kind of a failure. So this game does something utterly bizarre in that it combines the battle system of Yu-Gi-Oh! With the mana and life system of Duel Masters, and you'll see why that doesn't really work together in a bit. So you can see we have these starter decks here, full unpublished, with their own boxes with the open window. Although if you peel off the foil, then there's just a big hole in the box there. I guess that makes it cheaper, though. It is one where there is the pull tab on the front that you have to yank free. However, as I emphasized in my talk about the Pokemon deck, if you make this tear tab actually be in the back, then the flap that hangs it from the actual like peg hook, that can be folded in and turn it into an actually surprisingly darn sturdy tuck box, which is actually what I did here. I actually sliced off the back of the Troublemaker Ricky deck and turned it into a tuck box, because what happens is that extra little flap of cardboard there actually creates a point where the inner folds can cling to it, and that is what makes it such a solid tuck box. So to start with, the game has four major card types. You have your life form cards, which is their equivalent to monsters. They just wanted to use a more science fiction term, I guess. These are pretty straightforward. They have a fuel cost up here, and they do have attack and defense stats. However, these work like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Stats, where it's attack position and defense position, where only one stat matters at a time, depending on which direction the card is placed. And it works exactly like Yu-Gi-Oh! You set it sideways to use the card's defense value, and upways to do the card's attack value. And combat works largely the same way in both games. You have the attack value and the defense value, where there are cards with higher defense value that can stave off attacks. It's pretty straightforward, pretty much the basic thing. You then have tactics cards, which are the equivalent of your spell cards. Unlike with Yu-Gi-Oh, which has spells and traps, where spells you can play on your turn but are usually slow and can only be played outside of combat, and traps which are fast but have to be set down for a turn. These are cards that use sorcery and instant speed. This is a sorcery speed card, the Ricky Scooter, which is designed to be an equipment that goes onto a life form with Ricky in its name. So Ricky is, you might recognize him as the guy on the front of the cover of the comic book. He's sort of our main character here. He is one of the 3 archetypes in this set. We have 3 major archetypes in this game. We have the Ricky archetype, we have the zombie archetype, which is the infectors and all of that, and then we have the Emor City archetype. So these are all taken straight from the comic book. A comic book which, sadly, I think is too much exposition and not enough of a strong hook. But the idea is that Ricky and the infectors zombies have a battle in Emor City. So that is where we get our 3 core archetypes for the start. Troublemaker, the Ricky archetype is all about Troublemaker Ricky, getting him into play, getting all sorts of stuff for him to do, and finally playing his upgraded form, Ricky Ascended. The zombie, I'll let you guess what the zombie archetype is. Yes, it's all about putting cards from your deck into the discard pile and then bringing them back to life. Ooh. And Emor City Guard is sort of a unity approach, where you're supposed to build a board. Ricky and Emor City are both kind of ones about building a board, whereas Infectors is about making a strong discard pile. So all of you Yu-Gi-Oh players out there who know a thing about board building, especially one that's limited by mana cost, you can guess which one of these is probably the most potent archetype out there. It's the zombies. It's obviously the zombies. They have so much flexibility. Continuing on, we have these sorts of equipment tactics cards, and then we have these instant speed tactics cards with the little targeting reticule on them. So there are these function more like Magic the Gathering spells rather than the Yu-Gi-Oh spells and traps. We also have designated resource cards. Now, as I said before, Crusaders of Lornia uses the mana mechanics of Duel Masters, and Duel Masters is an any card is resource game. You can at any time set any card from your hand into your resource row once per turn, like with most resource systems, and you can use like your monsters and all that as resources. This one is more in line with like the Versus system or World of Warcraft resource system, in that you can set any card from your hand, but it has to be face down unless it's a designated resource card, which then has a form of one-shot ability. We have seen these sorts of things where it's a one-shot effect that you then flip face down after you use that effect, so it's like a one-time use thing. We've seen this in Versus system. We saw this in Strike Engine, which was a little game I went over, and also the World of Warcraft quest system. It's a pretty common mechanic. I think it's a pretty good mechanic for any card as resource games, because then you can have some more cool stuff you can do in more zones. I like the idea of games where there are cards that can, kind of be flexible and have cool things that give new life to zones, like in the Neopets game. I was talking about how there are cards with on-bank effects that are really cool. They're worth less victory points, but they allow you to have some other kind of benefit. I think those kinds of designs are neat, and this card's gonna come back. It's actually pretty important. And then finally, we have resource cards, which frequently have awkwardly stretched artwork, like you can see here. If you want a worse example, look at Changing Sides. Everybody there is it's like a dwarf, or like that one music video by that one guy. But the resource cards are your life points. What you do is at the start of the game, you build a stack of 10 of these, and these act as your life points, but they're a little different to how shields operate. And there are basic ones, although I can't find them here. I must have grabbed all the unique ones. But unlike with other games that tend to use this life points where you take the damage and it goes to your hand, in the case of resources, what you can do is once per turn, you can pick a resource with an effect and spend that resource. What happens is that resource gets discarded, however, you get to activate its effect. However, for all of you guys who have played card games or have any experience playing card games, you can imagine that being able to spend your life points to do powerful effects is in fact completely insane. Especially this card here, Resource Refinery, which I'm using as my example, is a resource card that then goes to your mana zone for free, and it doesn't count against your once per turn. So this card here, Resource Refinery, is basically a required 2 of in every single deck that ever gets made, because if you're not spending your first 2 turns ramping your way up to 4, then you're just dumb. So yeah, a lot of these cards are ridiculously overpowered. If it wasn't for the fact that you can only use 1 resource card per turn, I guarantee you people would use like 4 or 5 of their life points on their first turn, just getting these things into play and getting going. But yeah, these are our 4 major card types. However, we do encounter some problems when we start to get into the rules, because remember how I said it uses Yu-Gi-Oh's battle system? It uses Duel Masters' resource mechanic, which means you have to have mana in play, you have to have resources in play to put these characters into play, which goes up at a rate of like 1 per turn. But then there's also the fact that it uses the Yu-Gi-Oh battle system. Now, the Yu-Gi-Oh battle system is a system, it's actually different from basically all of the major card games out there, because in Yu-Gi-Oh what happens is the only way to attack your opponent directly to damage their life points is if they have no monsters in play. This is versus games like Magic the Gathering, which have the attacker and blocker steps, where you launch an attack against your opponent and they choose how many of your attackers that they are going to stop, or Pokemon, where the thing out in front is the life points. And like I said, Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of an exception in that the field needs to be empty in order to inflict damage to your opponent. And this is true of Crusaders of Lornia as well. The only way you can inflict damage to your opponent's resources is if they have no monsters in play. And this creates a host of problems, because it shouldn't be difficult to explain, because what happens is when it's a mana system like this, when you use a mana system with the required resources and stuff to get the cards into play, what usually happens is players usually play something slightly stronger from turn to turn. So what's generally going to happen in these games is either it's going to be like a constant exchange of characters where a player puts out a card, and then another player puts out a slightly stronger card to knock down that one, and then on the next turn, another player puts out a slightly stronger card and knocks out the other one. It's just an exchange between 1 and 1 and 1, or one player manages to get 2 or 3 characters out and they just cascade from there. Hello, it's me, just interrupting the video to better explain what the heck I'm rambling about. So, in games that use a designated resource system, for example, you have the once per turn resource system, like 1 card in Duel Masters or the lands in Magic the Gathering, they tend to be a lot slower in building their boards when you're using a mana system like this, which is why defending your life points by stepping something out in the way of an attack is the volition of the defending player. So your life points are technically a resource that you can sacrifice to preserve your board. So the fact that in Crusaders of Lornia you are incentivized to destroy everything your opponent has in play, and your opponent really has no recourse for that, is why building your board in that game is such a pain in the butt versus games like Magic and Duel Masters, where you can say, okay, I'll take the damage directly and continue to build on your board turn after turn after turn, even though you're losing life points. Based on the demonstrated card game from their Kickstarter project, that seems to be what happens a lot of the time. It's just either a stalemate where players are exchanging one monster after another and can't really build a board, or it's one player just cascading their way to an easy win. The thing is, yes, it's a similar system in Yu-Gi-Oh, but Yu-Gi-Oh has 2 things to let them get around this problem. The first one is breakthrough damage, and the other one is abundant removal. Now, breakthrough damage is when one monster attacks another one. If this monster that attacks has a higher power, like Blue Eyes White Dragon has an attack of 3,000 versus Honeybot, who's only 1,900, then the difference in that damage is inflicted to the opponent's life points. So in this case, I would destroy the Honeybot and inflict the remaining 1,100 points of damage to my opponent. However, because the Crusaders of Lornia does not use a life point system the same way, there is no breakthrough damage. So that is going to be a huge source of a stalemate. Not to mention, I mean, even games that imitate Duel Masters will frequently integrate some kind of breakthrough mechanic, where either a large being deals additional damage to the opponent's life points, or in the case of Garudamon, actually inflicts damage to life points when defeating a monster in combat. So both of these have ways to basically to get through like an opponent that tries to put up a wall or attempts to build a field. The other one is abundant removal. What Yu-Gi-Oh has always had, is a lot of cards that allow you to remove problems from the field. So if my opponent got out this guy and he has an effect that he gets +1/+1 for each zombie life form in my discard pile, which in a zombie deck can easily be a lot, I could use like something like Dark Hole or Fissure or Raigeki or something to remove him from play. I looked, and in all of the cards I found in this whole set, I found exactly 2 that perform a no questions asked removal. One is a designated resource card that costs 4 resources in order to use its effect, and the other one is a resource card that you also have to discard another resource card in order to use. However, again, you would be a fool not to pack 2 copies of special talents. I mean, the game also has its own version of Mirror Force, which is called Malik's Ego. So it does have its own version of Mirror Force, but the thing about a lot of the removal cards in this game is that they are conditional, and a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players will tell you that conditional removal cards are just too dang slow. Although the fact that you play this from your hand instead of having to set it down as a trap for a turn and risk it getting destroyed by your opponent does make Malik's Ego probably more useful. But like I said, it requires your opponent to attack. All you have to do to not trigger Malik's Ego is to just not attack, and that is certainly an option. They do have some cards with some really like stupidly high defensive stats, like Steel Golem is just supposed to sit there as a 0/8, and then of course you have Stoned Golem because we joke, ha 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 ha. Although it is also possible to team attack. You can have 2 characters gang up on one, although like I said, you have to have enough time to actually get 2 characters in play for that to happen, and that can only happen at like really late turns if you draw a lot of cards. It is another game that has really low draw power like Yu-Gi-Oh! In fact, I don't really remember there being a lot of cards that gave draw power, except, again, for some resource cards, like, got Ricky's favorite drink that you have to spend a life point to draw 2 cards. Again, you'd be a complete idiot to not include full playset of this. Yeah, that's actually a problem, is that there's a lot of cards, especially the resource cards, that are no-brainers. I think I talked about this before, and that is having high rarity on cards that would be a no-brainer to include in any deck. Resource Refinery is a foil rare. I don't know if you can see that foiling. Yeah, there we go. It's a foil rare. So this is a rare card that everybody's gonna want to get. It's that card. It's that Pot of Greediosity, whatever it was known as for so long. I think it's called Pot of Duality. I think it was originally going to be called Pot of Greediosity. I know that was the fan nickname for it for a while. But the worst one is, of course, the super duper rare exclusive promo card, Guardian of Lornia. Guardian of Lornia is basically Battle Fader. It's Battle Fader without the requirement. So it's another card that's a no-brainer everybody would want to play full playset of, because remember how I talked about how most games would just be an exchange one monster for another monster turn after turn after turn with no breakthrough damage and nothing to really break up the momentum. You'd want to play this card because it stops your opponent from attacking and ends the battle phase, just like Battle Fader, although unlike Battle Fader, it actually has a body on it and doesn't remove itself from play when it uses its effect. And it gives you another monster to get into play, so you can get 2 or even 3 on your turn. So this is going to be another card that's a no-brainer to include in every deck. And I've said not to do this! Don't do this! Don't make cards that should probably belong in every deck be like superpower exclusive. That is a hot ticket way to make your game inaccessible to most people. But yeah, like I said, it is a system that just does not work well together. They do not play well together. A game that risks falling into a state of just pure stasis due to the combination of the mana mechanic also draining your hand twice as fast, with very low draw power with the rapid drain on your hand. It just seems like this is a game that can very quickly stagnate into a slog. And like I said, watching the live video, that seems to be what happens a lot of the time, is that the game just kind of peters out unless everybody, you know, applies common sense and runs full playset of Ricky's favorite drink and just starts playing that every turn after they're done getting all of their resource refineries in play. So, like I said, that's my core impression of the game, is that it would be just a major pain to play through the whole way if you're not just absolutely draining your life points, which any player will do, because if you ask any guy who's been playing card games for a long time, the only life point that matters is the last one. So yeah, that's another thing to keep in mind when you are designing your card game. It can't just have mechanics that, you know, function. The mechanics have to be fun. There has to be a way for things to quickly alter the board state. It can't be a game that relies a lot on luck of the draw with very little draw power that can just, you know, turn into a slog. Like I've like, people have sent me their game ideas. I've encountered a few games. I've encountered at least one game where the rate of actually hitting the game's designated win condition was like a 1 in 8 chance, and I'm like, wow, that seems like something you need to do some work on. So yeah, if your game is just not flowing well, it might be a good idea to see if you can employ some things that allow the game to flow better. Like I said, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game where draw power is incredibly low and incredibly punished. Like, you have to sacrifice a quarter of your deck to draw 2 cards these days. This is versus other games like even Duel Masters, where drawing cards is easy, and then there's Pokemon, where you can just grab a new hand every turn. So figuring out how to fix the flow of your game to make it so that the game keeps moving and doesn't just stagnate turn after turn after turn is going to be a very important thing to keep in mind when designing your game. So yeah, that is Crusaders of Lornia. I personally think it's a mess. Oh yeah, I didn't mention, I think these cards are actually Yu-Gi-Oh! Size. I don't think I mentioned that. But yeah, its design is a mess. I can kind of see why it didn't make it past its first set, but hey, we've got some lessons learned from it. So that's Crusaders of Lornia, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off. Join us next time on Cards from the Abyss.